I'm going to be showing you 2 DIY crafts you can do with your kids. For the first craft, you're going to need a pair of scissors, some ink pads like these of various colors, magnets, some Mod Podge, but you have to make sure it's the glass one, clear glass gems, but again, make sure that they're clear and don't have a coating, and then a thick piece of paper. I just use scrapbooking paper because it's thicker than printer paper, and a sponge brush. So I'm just going to go ahead and get this set up. I just want to throw this disclaimer out there. My daughter is only 16 months, so these crafts are way harder to do with her. I kind of have to help her a little bit more, but if your kid's a little bit older, then this is definitely a craft that they can do on their own. But I like to show that you can do this for any age. So what we're doing is just taking her thumbs, because they're her biggest finger right now, and we're just dipping them into the ink pads and putting them on the paper. Now, you could also make hearts with these. It's a little bit harder to do because her fingers are kind of small right now. So I try to do it if you see with the orange and the purple. But if your kid has longer fingers or if they're a little bit older, definitely make some hearts as well because it's a really cute shape. Now, I don't know if you can tell, but throughout this video, after I do the thumbprint once, I'll go ahead and wipe it off with a baby wipe just because I don't want the colors mixing. So I left my daughter with the ink pads so that she can continue to play, and I gave her another piece of paper. But in the meantime, I just went ahead and I started doodling on each of her little thumbprints different animals. So for the yellow one, I made it into a bee. For the green one, I made it into a turtle. The orange one, I made it into a fish. So you can just Google different animals online, whatever you want. This is really up to you. Now this is where if your kid was older, they could be doing this by themselves and make their own animals. But because my daughter's so young, she's not able to. So I'm just going to go ahead and continue drawing animals. I actually went onto Pinterest for some inspiration because I ran out of animals to draw. I couldn't think of any more. And you don't have to be an artist. One thing I did forget to mention in the beginning of items you're going to need a thin tip marker or a pen. I just use this Sharpie. It doesn't matter what you use. So the next step is to take the glass Mod Podge and the sponge brush and to start lightly coating each of the clear gems. Once you coat it, you're going to put it right on top of the animal. You are able to move it because eventually the glue will dry clear. So kind of move it around to make sure the animal's in the center. And I'm just going to continue doing this. The cool thing about these gems are when you put them on, he was like, there's no way this is the babies. It actually makes the image appear a little bit larger. Like, no, they are. It's magnetized once you put the gem on top, which is something I really like. So once I finish all of that up, you have to just make sure you let these dry for a good amount of time. If you don't, when you go to cut them, you're going to notice that the paper is still wet and it's going to rip. So I just went ahead and cut around each of the circles. Just make sure that when you're cutting, it is dry completely because I did notice that a little bit of mine were still kind of wet. And then once I'm all done with that, I'm going to open my magnets and use a hot glue gun, which I apologize. This is actually the second tool you're going to need that I forgot to put in the initial clip. You're going to need a hot glue gun and some glue. So then I'm just going to glue a magnet onto the back of each of these. And I definitely recommend gluing them individually and not doing it all at once, because the glue dries so fast and you don't want it to pull the paper away. You want these crafts to last for a while. So this is what it looks like in the end. Now I did use scrapbooking paper because I wanted the back to have a design on it. So that's why you see that some of them are pink and green. So I'm just going to finish up putting the magnets on the back of all of these. Once I do that, I did let it sit for a little bit so that it could dry completely. Because again, I don't want the magnets, once they go on the fridge, to pull off and then rip the paper. So I'm just going to finish these up. I actually made some for myself and some for my father-in-law to give to him for Father's Day. I thought it was a cute keepsake to have. So the second craft we're going to do is a mini handprint keychain. So you're going to need Shrinky Dink paper, a pair of scissors, a hole puncher, the same type of sponge brush, the thin tip Sharpie, the same Mod Podge for glue, and then whatever color paints. This just happened to be the only paints I have upstairs. This is what the Shrinky Dink paper looks like. It's just a clear piece of paper. but it's really cool because it actually shrinks once you put it in the oven. So I'm going to start off with taking my sponge brush and paint and putting a thin layer of paint on my daughter's hand. You don't want it to be too thick because if it's really thick, then it gets everywhere. And again, this is a little bit more difficult with a younger child. If your kid's a little bit older, it's probably going to be easier because it's a little bit harder with a baby because they don't really understand what you're doing. So once I cover her hand with the paint, I put down the Shrinky Dink paper and I just quickly put her hand down. Now this is what they look like once you're all done. I did go ahead and use a baby wipe and kind of just fix the edges if there was any mess ups. Now I recorded all of these handprints being made, but I guess the camera shut off. So once I finished that, I wait till the handprints dry. I waited about an hour because it's acrylic paint, and acrylic paint honestly dries so fast. So once it was dry, I went ahead and wrote my daughter's name and the year on the edge of each of the handprints. The really cool thing is, once these go in the oven, it's going to shrink, so the writing is going to get really tiny as well. I did use a Sharpie. I don't know if you can use a pen on Shrinky Dink paper. I definitely suggest using a Sharpie. But I just wrote her name and the date on each hand. And this is just a close-up of what it looked like. So the next step is to cut around each of the hands. I did leave the fingers as like a circular shape because I thought that it would be more cute once it was made into a keychain. And then I'm just going ahead and punching a hole into it. So the next step is to preheat the oven to 325 degrees. Once the oven is preheated, then you're going to want to put in your handprints. I just laid down a piece of wax paper on top of a pan. This is what it looks like after 2 minutes. They do curl up on the edges, but that's okay. It's going to flatten out. You put it in the oven for about 2 to 3 minutes depending. Now, this is what they came out looking like. For the first handprint and that one right there, you'll notice that they look kind of chunky. It's because I tried to use the glitter. Now I know you're not supposed to use glitter when you're cooking it like that because it looks chunky like that. So I ended up just getting rid of those 2 hands. And then I'm going to take the glass Mod Podge and I'm going to put a light coating onto each of the hands to try to preserve the paint, just so that they last a little bit longer. So I also recommend letting these dry for a good amount of time. It takes about an hour to 2 hours for the Mod Podge to dry entirely. Make sure that the coating is not too thick, otherwise it's going to take a lot longer to dry. So this is what they look like after 2 hours. I'm just going to go ahead and use my key rings to add to the holes to make little keychains. So these are my 2 crafts, my Thumbprint Magnets and my little Handprint Keychains. I think they're both super cute and they're definitely great keepsakes and they make great gifts as well.